This is the second time we have welcomed our first presenter to the stage. As a nonfiction judge and presenter, he's an author. He's so bloody awesome. It's intimidating. He's an editor, he's a composer, lyricist, record and television producer, co-founder and president of Serious Thinking, one of the great names anywhere, Limited, an educational media production company. He has won 3 Emmys. He's won 2 Grammys for his musical contributions to Sesame Street, for which he has written more than 300 of the songs that we have all sung since. He has served as co-executive producer of Between the Lions, and don't we love that, the award-winning daily literacy education series he created for PBS. Gee whiz. He spent 8 years as senior editor at Random House, also charter editor of National Lampoon. Yeah, I'm telling you. Look, where else would you want to be tonight? You know, where else? In 1993, he became chairman of the Modern Library's Board of Advisors, renewing his ties at Random House. Author, satirist, latest book, and I just got it. I can't wait to read it. Encyclopedia Paranoiaca is an alphabetized, intensively cross-referenced guide to everyone and everything you should be afraid of or worried about. To which today, just this afternoon, I added 7 entries. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us from New York to introduce the 2013 nonfiction runner-up, I hope you will welcome Christopher Cerf. He's in the building.
What an introduction. I hope I'm not one of the things you have to be afraid of. But I'm honored to be here tonight. It's great to be back here at an event that Catherine and I love coming to and are proud to be part of. And I'm very proud to be able to introduce Gilbert King tonight, who's our nonfiction runner-up with a truly amazing book, Devil in the Grove. So I just want to tell you a little about it. On July 15th, 1949, as King relates in this wonderfully researched and utterly mesmerizing book, a young Lake County, Florida white man named Willie Paget was driving his estranged 17-year-old wife, Norma Lee, home from a night of drinking and dancing when their dilapidated 1940 Ford broke down. 2 African-American World War II veterans, Samuel Shepard and Walter Irvin, stopped to try to offer their assistance to Willie, but Paget, roaring drunk, took exception to this offer, and a fight ensued. The next day, Shepard and Irvin and 2 other black men who hadn't even been on the scene stood accused of raping Norma Lee Paget, a crime that almost certainly never occurred. Before long, the Ku Klux Klan had gotten into the act. They said they wanted to, quote, defend the flower of Southern womanhood, end quote, and they did that by torching a black section of the town of Groveland where this crime had occurred. And a mob of vigilantes, which might possibly have been led by the sheriff himself, a wonderful character, not a wonderful guy, but a wonderfully told character that's been brought to life by Gilbert King. His name was Willie V. McCall, and it seems that he might have been one of the murderers in that mob that killed one of those 4 defendants, would-be defendants. Well, the NAACP's Thurgood Marshall knew that in the white supremacist South of that time, any black man accused of sexually violating a white woman was almost certain to be found guilty, totally certain, actually. But Marshall also recognized that a properly conceived defense of the 3 remaining Groveland boys, as they were called, presented an opportunity not only to win their case on appeal, but also it could establish precedents that could help dismantle Jim Crow. And that, of course, is what Marshall was all about. So ignoring the daunting risk to himself, and it was daunting, one of his associates had his house bombed while this trial was going on, Marshall assumed the leadership of the case. Gilbert King has taken advantage of unique access he had to all the NAACP records and uncensored FBI transcripts as well to construct a minute-by-minute account of this case that is a harrowing crime thriller, but more importantly, an intimate portrait of Marshall and his fellow NAACP lawyers. At the same time he was defending the Groveland boys, he was preparing the landmark Brown versus Board education case. And King has been able to demonstrate, as I don't think any historian has before, how the NAACP's tactics in every case they handled were part of the same disciplined strategy that helped end segregation in this country. Thurgood Marshall ultimately convinced the Supreme Court to overturn the Groveland boys' case, and it was a legal triumph, but in human terms, it was wrenchingly hollow. It shows how long we still have to go. Sheriff McCall took it upon himself to transport 2 of the defendants to the site of the new trial, and he managed to pump multiple gunshots into his 2 handcuffed prisoners en route. And he called it self-defense, and McCall was exonerated by a jury that included many of his cronies, and the good citizens of Lake County consistently re-elected him until '72, when yet another black prisoner was killed during a time he was in custody, and the governor finally removed McCall from office. And King has a wonderful quote that I think sums up how incredibly sad and important this book is. He quotes Marshall as saying, "Sometimes I get awfully tired of trying to save the white man's soul." So in any case, I loved reading this book, and I'm really proud to introduce to you its author, Gilbert King. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chris, for that really generous introduction. And I also want to thank the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, Sharon and Mark, for all this amazing work in putting this together. It's been a true honor to actually be here and celebrate, along with Adam, Andrew, and Ben, whose books I really believe are going to be remembered and read widely for years and years to come. So thank you very much. And also, to be here on the night when we're honoring Wendell Berry's lifetime achievements, it's another spectacular honor. I guess I just want to say one thing about how grateful I am to be here in front of people who are so committed to peace, because when I travel around the South, I don't always get the same kind of peace-loving audience. I'll tell you a quick story. I was down in Groveland, in Lake County, where this particular story took place, and events are still pretty raw. A lot of the people still live there. And I was very nervous about this because I saw all the cars in the parking lot of the library that I was going to speak at. And I said, maybe if I just slip in quietly, do my little talk, and get out, everything will be fine. And as I'm walking to the library, I saw one of those newspaper boxes. And on the front page of the newspaper, author Gilbert King to be here tonight. And I said, okay, so much for slipping in quietly. And I walked in, it was packed with faces, and the library director came running up to me, and she said, Mr. King, I think it's only fair to warn you that we've had 2 threats called in this evening. I was like, oh boy. She goes, but you don't have to worry, we called the sheriff's department. It's the last place I wanted you calling. That's the last joke I have for this entire speech. As writers, there's no denying that the books we work on for years are journeys. And whether they're fiction or nonfiction, our stories never really fail to take us down roads that we didn't imagine when we started them. I think every author will tell you that here tonight. But with my book, it was a little bit different. One of the most frequent comments I hear from readers is, I had no idea that this was happening in my lifetime, or I had no idea that this was our American justice system not that long ago. And my answer is usually, neither did I. I'm not an academic, so when I began my own journey, I had really no passion or insights into race. And I was reminded of the great judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals, J. Skelly Wright, who struck down countless segregation laws in Louisiana and became an integral part of the civil rights movement. Wright tells a story of growing up in the South and accepting, never really questioning the racial disparity that he witnessed in his life. And it wasn't until he was a young man in New Orleans, he was working as a lawyer one night across the street, and they were having a Christmas party at the Lighthouse for the Blind. And Wright was transfixed as he was watching just across from his office how the sightless guests were led up by their arms up the stairs and into this large room. And he watched as the whites were led to one side of the front of the room and the blacks were led to the back of the room because they couldn't see to segregate themselves. And it was something that transfixed him, and he knew his life could never be the same. He said something like, when you go to bed at night, you think of that, and it stays with you. And I felt very similar to that kind of discovery while I was on my journey learning these things, because they were things I did not know when I started this case. When I began this book, I thought I was going to be writing a story about Thurgood Marshall and the best and the brightest lawyers from the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, and how they used the law to transform America. And I thought this was going to be that kind of story. But what they did under constant threat and under constant danger was a surprise to me. But it was only part of the story, and it's only part of the book that I was writing. What I learned on this journey was that Thurgood Marshall knew the importance of appealing to hearts and minds. He knew that there were only so much that he could do in society by law. Trials were expensive, and the verdicts in the South were never surprising to him, especially in capital cases where men were sentenced to the electric chair. They were very predictable to Marshall and his lawyers. Yet Marshall would take these trains down south to these towns, these inhospitable lands where racist judges, malicious prosecutors, and the Klan were waiting for him. And he knew that the 12 white men on the juries that he encountered were simply not going to swim against the tide of legalized white supremacy. But up in the Jim Crow balconies, hundreds of black Americans would travel miles to see him, Lawyer Marshall, Mr. Civil Rights, and his bright, young, and incredibly courageous lawyers with the Legal Defense Fund. This would be the first time they'd see in court a black man who was not the defendant, a black man wearing a suit, looking judges and prosecutors in the eye, arguing the law. Marshall knew the importance of his appearances because he was giving black citizens a glimpse of what was possible in America. But he did more than inspire the members of his own race. Marshall was also capable of inspiring young white people to live in a better America. The writer John J. Chapman wrote a passage in an essay he called The Negro Problem in 1915. Chapman wrote, "There is a law governing the meeting of the races. When a powerful race meets a helpless race, two things happen. First, there is a carnival of crime. Cruelty and oppression take place. Some men in each race become hard-hearted. But the reverse also happens thereafter. Goodness and mercy are developed. Certain men become saints and heroes." Thurgood Marshall would probably be the first person to admit that he was no saint. But on a night when we gather here in Dayton to celebrate the literacy of peace, it's only fitting that we recognize the heroic contributions by those in our not too distant past. I'm extremely honored to accept this award, and I thank you very much. Thank you.
Perfect example of what I was saying right at the beginning of this. We would be hearing things we had never heard before, phrased in a way we have never heard them phrased. It's a remarkable story, and I thank you very much for that. I am reminded as a child of the Mid-South. I remember a time when I invited my sister Rosemary and my wife Nina and I invited a civil rights leader, one who was not known perhaps as well as most of the others, even though he has an airport named after him now, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth. He was in Cincinnati at this time. He could not go back. Do you remember Fred? He could not go back to Alabama at that time because $1 million judgment was levied against him, and he had a church in Avondale in Cincinnati, which he asked me to speak, which I did. Then he came to our house. He gave me a phrase that I think would be worth all of us remembering, and that's the only reason I'm interjecting it now. We were having dinner, and I asked him about Bull Connor at the middle of dinner somewhere, naturally throwing in something that would be indigestible in the middle. So I asked him about Bull Connor and what his feeling was. Reverend Fred was known as the little lion of the civil rights movement. He was brave as a lion. He was also completely outspoken, and he didn't care what he said or to whom he said it. He said it whether it was politic or not. He remained that way till he died. I said, tell me about Bull Connor. What do you think about Bull Connor? You were blown up out of your house. You were thrown in your underwear into the front yard by an explosion. They went after your children. They did everything they could, burning down your house. They did everything to intimidate and try to kill you. And I said, what'd you think about Bull Connor? He said, Bull Connor is one of those fellows. He says, he's one of my greatest failures. He said, I was really good at eventually talking to everybody. He said, I could talk them down or talk them out a little bit. He said, but Bull Connor was another kind of fellow. You only run into one or two of them in your whole lifetime if you're lucky. Because he's the kind of fellow that holds his shoulder against tomorrow, thinking it can be today forever. I said, would you repeat that? And he did. And he repeated it, and I ran upstairs, wrote it down fast as I could. And a year later, he asked me back to his church in Avondale, and I told that story. And after I told that story, he came up to me and he said, Nick, did I say that? He didn't even remember. The genius, the Wendells of the world, the Fred Shuttlesworth of the world, the authors and artists, they don't even know what they are saying to us and how it matters to us and how it changes us and how it changes everybody in the bloody room and therefore everybody in the bloody town by the time it's over. Congratulations. Congratulations.